Before we start this then, yeah? Right, we're just about, councillors, to admit members of the public. So please bear with us for a few moments. Everybody's admitted.
On the way in? Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry for the short delay, and we did have a couple of technical issues that we've now resolved. Welcome to this pre-committee presentation. My name is Councillor David Tucker, and I'm the chairman of the Planning Committee. Just a couple of points to note before we begin, please. Please ensure that your microphones are turned to mute when individuals are not speaking. In terms of dealing with the arrangements, the objectors will give the first presentation, followed by the applicants. May I remind all attendees that councillors shall not ask questions directly to the applicant or the objectors during the presentation, except for the purposes of clarification, but may, following any presentation, ask officers to investigate any issues raised and report to their findings to the committee meeting at which a decision on the application is going to be made. Each party will be allowed 30 minutes. You will be given a warning by Mr. Wiley when you have 1 minute remaining. And please, would the objectors commence with a pre-commencement presentation? So that's the formalities out of the way. So what I'd like to start now, as we said, we're going to start with the objectors. Do we have a Mr. Graham Shaw, please? Can we hear you, Mr. Shaw? I think you're on mute, sir.
I am sorry.
That's
yes,
fine.
Could I upload a video presentation, please?
Yeah, I just need to make him
Just 1 moment, sir. We're just going to make that possible.
co-host. So you should be able to.
Yeah, you should be able to do that now, Mr. Shaw. So please start when you're ready.
Okay, good afternoon, councillors. I'm Graham Shaw, the chair of Paul Parish Council. Thank you for the opportunity to say a few words. At the planning meeting held on the 4th of February, the planning committee members were very clear in they wanted to see proper community engagement and consultation. But what did we actually see? What was delivered was a presentation by ABP and its partners, basically telling us that all consultees were now happy with their mitigation measures. There were a series of 5-minute slots to present our concerns, but no opportunity to challenge any of their replies. Just a short response on traffic and flooding was given. We asked 27 specific questions and asked for written answers, but none were given. A presentation of opportunities to address village concerns was given. We've had no response from ABP. And while we accept that this land is designated for development and enterprise, we remained appalled by the scale, the density and the layout of the scheme and the impact it will have on our village. And we expect further face-to-face consultation before any planning decision is made. As stated, the focus of Paul's presentation was not just to identify our ongoing concerns, but provide suggestions and opportunities to address these concerns. Our most serious concerns continue to be the scale, the density, the layout, the loss of spatial separation, the loss of unique village character, increased flood risk, impact on the local and wider road networks, and in our opinion, a failure to fully assess cumulative impacts with regards to the Yorkshire Energy Park and the current Salt End Chemical Park developments. It'll be of no surprise the biggest issue to Paul is the proximity of Building 15, a massive distribution building close to our village. It's been likened to an Amazon warehouse, and it's interesting to note it's twice as big as the Amazon building at North Ferriby, which is 558,000 square feet, currently being opposed by the Ferriby community. So this slide shows an artist's impression, an aerial photograph of a similar sized building, just to illustrate the impact it's likely to have. And the rainwater runoff from this building and its hard standings contribute a serious risk to overwhelming Paul village drainage. This slide provides some visual context and helps illustrate the basis of some of our fears. Building 15 is 22 metres high, 8 metres higher than Paul Lighthouse and the size of 21 rugby pitches. Although it's been pushed back a short distance, it remains a domineering structure and is close to Paul residential properties. It contributes massively to the loss of spatial separation from industry. And the proposed physical mitigations will have do little to reduce the visual impacts of this building. So, trying to be proactive with ABP, we've suggested amendments to the scheme, which we hope the Planning Committee will take note of and maybe support. These amendments go a long way to addressing our concerns and are shown in these before and after plans. So the key to Paul Parish Council's proposal is to remove that largest building, building 15 next to the village, and to relocate two of the smaller buildings. This creates limited spatial separation between the village and adjacent industry. And we propose that the open land created is landscaped and allocated as a non-build zone in the same way as the Sewell Group did for the Yorkshire Energy Park. In addition, we suggest that Paul Road is upgraded to a dual carriageway with cycleways and footpaths, and the drainage from Paul is pumped out into Headon at Haven rather than rely on a flat outlet. We propose a detailed study of the cumulative impact regarding traffic impact and air pollution from traffic, and that the physical mitigations are increased, and there is a guarantee of no nuisance during this construction period. Of course, there are other benefits to this amended scheme in terms of reduced impact on the adjacent SSI site and Ramsar site. I reiterate, we've received no response from ABP on these proposals, and we gave copies of these proposals to ABP. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak. Recognise this is an opportunity to create employment, but please give full consideration to the negative impacts this will have on Paul and its residents. Also, please consider the cumulative impact this project will have together with the YEP and the ongoing and proposed developments at the Saltend Chemicals Park. This is probably the biggest development ever to be considered by the Council Planning Committee. We believe it's essential you come to the right decision for all concerned, because the impacts will be felt for generations to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Shaw, for a very comprehensive presentation. Do we have Steve Gallant from Headon Town Council, please?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm a Headon Town Councillor and resident of Headon. I'd like to reiterate the point about the poor consultation. 2 one-hour video calls with ABP, of which 20 minutes of each was taken up by their presentation, does not really allow for sufficient feedback from these communities. Secondly, I'd like to point out that we have a local plan for this area, which was only completed about 3 years ago after many years in development. The designated land for this development was marked for employment development on that local plan, but did not specify the scale of this development or consider the disruption that would occur in the building and development of the site. I'm afraid that the local plan, although it's only 3 years old, has already been severely undermined by the decision to allow the Yorkshire Energy Park on land that was designated not for development due to severe flood risk. This was also against planning officers' advice and against very strong local feeling on the subject. So the local plan, which was meant to protect this area and manage development on the impacts from the severe impact from flood risk and protect wildlife in the area, has been discredited, I'm afraid, with residents in this area after having spent years putting it together. We're now faced with potentially 2 huge estates of warehousing bordering on these communities of Heddon and Paul. Quite where all the tenants are coming from for these warehouses, I'm not sure. We're on the wrong side of town of Hull for access to the motorway, and being on this side of Hull adds a good 30 minutes to any lorry's travel time to get to the motorway networks, unlike the Amazon site in Brough. This is overdevelopment of this area, which has a high flood risk, as I've already said. We've already had 2 severe flood events in this area twice in the last 15 years, and quite a number of near misses in the last 2 or 3 wet winters. So I speak for residents and for the Town Council of Heddon when I say that we want to see the scale of this project reduced, to reduce the environmental impact, leave wide borders around the edge of it, and introduce mature trees and more wildlife space around it as well. Post-COVID and post-Brexit, there is a question really about, even with the Freeport, whether there'll be the need for all of these warehouses. When you see that EU exports are down 40% since the beginning of this year. So rather than risk giving a go-ahead to a ghost town of empty warehouses, I would like to ask the committee to think carefully before agreeing to the scale of this proposal. I'd like to see much greater mitigation to reduce the environmental, traffic and noise pollution it will cause. And given the combined scope of Yorkshire Energy Park and the ABP development, East Riding's Planning Committee would be letting the residents of South West Holderness down if it does not stop to consider the overall impact and strength of local feeling. I hope East Riding Planning can take the lead in reshaping and curtailing this project after the upsetting and unpopular decision on Yorkshire Energy Park. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Gunn. We have Mark Ashbridge, resident of Preston. Mr. Ashbridge, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, thank you. Could I share my screen with you for a presentation, please?
Yes, give us 1 minute and we
Thank
give you that lines.
Okay, it should be.
Yeah, okay, Mr. Ashbridge, you should be able to do that now.
Thank you very much. Hopefully that's coming through. Apologies for a slight delay.
Yeah, oh, there's Mr. Ashbridge, we can see that.
Thank you very much, good. So I'm a resident of Preston South, and I suppose I speak for everybody in the Preston and Heddon area. Speaking as someone living in close proximity to the site, this commercial development has the potential to have a large negative impact on our lives despite any mitigation plans. It's a huge development, completely out of proportion with the surrounding semi-rural communities, and combined with the proposed Yorkshire Energy Park, we'll see the removal of a large greenfield area that creates a welcome buffer between these communities and the industrial areas of the A1033. The people who live in Paul, Heddon and the neighbouring villages will have made a conscious choice to live in this area, specifically because of the separation from Hull and a feeling of countryside living, an ideal distance away from a large city. It's worth reminding everyone of the communities that will be affected in some way: Paul, Heddon, Thornton and Camerton, and then Preston and Preston South, which joins the Heddon boundary. That's quite a large number of local residents upon whom this development will have some impact, but it feels as if there's not commensurate public engagement to discuss their feelings and opinions, especially in view of the process moving forward during a national lockdown situation when adequate public consultations cannot be held. Short online meetings for important matters such as this, which only allow 2 or 3 speakers, do not enable a majority of the community to be involved, and certainly not the many older residents who may be less able to use the technology required. We're all aware that flooding is one of the major concerns with any development of this scale in an area with the type of low-lying land we have surrounding the Humber estuary, It's not without good reason that we refer to floodplains in Holderness, given the history of flooding we have, plus the regular sight of large areas of standing water and high drain levels. Despite assurances from the developers, we're naturally nervous that the extra pressure put on the local waterways from this development will not have a bigger adverse impact on the surrounding villages and properties, many of which, my own included, have a drain in very close proximity. Perhaps the greatest and most immediate impact to local life will be the increase in traffic volumes. The nature of the activities at the site would suggest the majority of additional traffic will be HGVs, which is less than ideal. And again, we're assured that this has been mitigated for with Highways Agency assistance, but it does not alter the fact that there is one route in and out of this site from Hull and the A63, M62. So this won't be a perfect distribution hub with a number of easy access roads that are ideal for large numbers of goods vehicles. Any major incidents usually mean that this traffic must be diverted around the rural area, and this inevitably all ends up at the crossroads in Preston Village, which is already a major bottleneck. The inclusion of the Kingstown roundabout in this scheme could cause a number of issues because the proposed new access to the site means that much of the right-of-way is being taken away from the head-end traffic and transferred to vehicles entering the new site. I'd question the decision to use this roundabout for access, bringing as it does a lot of extra traffic close to the town. And we must also not forget that there's another roundabout planned between Saltend and Heddon for access to the proposed Yorkshire Energy Park, which could further stifle the free traffic flow. This is all in addition to potential Paul Road traffic safety issues and continuous construction traffic for a development that might take years to complete. We'd also be interested to know if we're looking at a site which has 24/7 activity or which operates shifts and so on. So in summary, a number of issues to concern the local community, many of whom may be unaware of the scale and impact of the development and the increase in momentum surrounding it. This is in addition to any environmental issues and impacts on established wildlife populations, which may have consequences we see for a number of years to come. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Asbridge, for a very comprehensive presentation. We have Andrew Nicholson, a spokesman for Padal. Mr. Nicholson, are you there?
I am here.
Okay, sir, when you are ready, please start.
Chairman, councillors, today I'm representing all the members of the Paddle Group, which is the Pole Against the Development of Enterprise Land. There are over 600 people who live directly in this area and a further 300 members from outside of the immediate area. This application's pure size and complexity makes it the biggest industrial planning application in the history of the East Riding Council. The added pressures from national levels have clearly been created and more influential because of the award of the free zone. This is seen by some people in the authorities and the applicant as the Holy Grail, the knight in shining armour. The press have pumped misleading information about this proposed site and have sold the applicants and the application as the saviour to all. Reading the planning report, we all feel that some predetermination is already at work. This is not an if, but a when. Every opportunity to accommodate this application is documented in this report. 7.9, the dismissal of the LDO restrictions are seen as not reasonable to impose on this application. Again, a breach of the local plan. 7.14, the restrictions on port-related employment removed are seen as unnecessary or unreasonable. The local plan to be ignored again. 7.38, the common sense requirement of an assessment of the impact of other local plan developments taken into consideration with this application, seen as not reasonable to require this development to address other existing highway issues. The lack of consideration of local knowledge on the current traffic situation seems to be ignored, and the simulations and models provided by out-of-town consultancies seems to be the only acceptable answer. 7.53, the current mitigation site is failing, and it states this in the report, that the site has demonstrated that overall bird levels is decreasing in this area. It also notes that there is a notable decrease in the number of birds across the Humber estuary. If this is the case, will this site not be the nail in the coffin for these birds and the SSI site? 7.60. Great crested newts identified and found on site. They were also found on the YEP site, and previously 2 licenses have been issued around Paul construction work. No one has invested the possibility of a new breeding area. 7.90. The heritage impact assessment found a moderate adverse effect from the overall development of this site. This means it would conflict with the character of the landscape, have an adverse impact on the characteristic features, and diminish a sense of place or cause a notable deterioration in the existing view. It went on to say that the scale development result in visual distractions and a clear level of change, and even with the control heights of the building, an adverse effect would remain. 7.107. The planning officer considers that Paul Conservation Area has a limited relationship with the site. It actually starts 10 metres away from the site and provides one of the 2 ways in and out of the village. 7.112. Historic England referred to port-related work on the site, which was negated with the statement. It would be unreasonable to expect port-related employment development on this site of almost 200 hectares, despite the applicant's ability to already do this with 1,240 hectares on the current Hull docks. 7.113. Harm was identified to heritage sites, several of which are the high significance. However, these harms have been overruled as this application brings public benefits to delivery of a large-scale employment development on a key development site. 7.120. The height of the buildings is not seen as an issue due to the proximity of Salt End. This may not be the case when looking from Salt End, but it will be the case when driving out of the village from Paul. 7.141. The declaration of a climate emergency is ignored. This means that buildings that contribute heavily to climate change problems take priority over the climate with the addition of more traffic, more trains, cars and trucks. Clearly, a development of this scale will have effect on the surrounding area. It is acknowledged in the report that there would be an adverse effect. What is totally disappointing to Paddle is that it narrows that down to just 3 houses on the Headon Road in Paul. How can that be? Yes, the biggest industrial estate in the history of East Riding will only impact 3 houses. 8.5. It is considered that the reasoning for allowing this application has been clearly and convincingly justified and the substantial public benefits established. It is an exceptionally large employment allocation and the predicted effects of the development are consummate with the development scale. However, 2,000 objections have been logged in the form of letters and a petition about this application and the LDO. As of 2 o'clock today, not a single letter of support from the public, not one, has been logged on the council's website in the last 3 years. You must ask why, that no one has put their name and there is no recorded support from the public. It's clear that someone somewhere is creating a need for this site that really doesn't exist. It's certainly not the public or members. As Paddle, all we wanted was predeposition from the applicant, but all we have seen is predetermination. They have shown no empathy, understanding or support to the surrounding inhabitants, and the whole process has been clinical, deliberate and unsympathetic in every possible way, purely driven by money and available funding with no compassion for the oldness area. Even the 1-hour public consultation resulted in them fielding questions and then promising to come back with answers, but we got nothing. And now here we are about to be told again what is going to happen. We have to ask everyone else on this call today, hand on heart, would you want this on your doorstep? We know that the YP site was approved despite it not appearing in the local plan. We ask you to take the lead again and help us in our hour of need by rejecting this application. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Nicholson. Our last speaker is Councillor John Dennis, Ward Member. Councillor Dennis, can you hear me?
Can indeed, and you can hear me.
Yes, Councillor Dennis, we can. Please start when you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chairman and members. You will doubtless recall that I have spoken before on how the ward of South West Holderness suffers unfairly from serious industrial blight. I make no apology for doing so again. We have always been a mainly residential ward with extensive agricultural areas. However, over the years, we have seen the industry grow to at least 350 acres with all that it entails. We're now faced with a further 650, a total of over 1,000 acres. How equitable and just is that? It's far more than any other ward in the East Riding has to tolerate. And whatever happened to the policy of non-coalition of communities? the buffer zone, ensuring our ancient identities will be gone forever. The scheme is universally unpopular, as you've heard from our colleagues today. People in the adjacent communities are totally in opposition, plus many from further afield, or who will have to drive past the site. If it comes to pass, it will result in the following. Gone will be the pleasant countryside surrounding these ancient communities, which residents have come to value. Gone will be their rural commute to and from work, which they've experienced all these years, and no more herds of deer will be seen. Gone will be the peace and quiet of living in an agricultural area, only to be replaced by noisy industrial units and all their associated disturbance. The combined impacts of this massive project and the Yorkshire Energy Park opposite will be life-changing. The loss of this farmland will be detrimentally felt by the local people for generations to come. The daily commute will be impacted by all the construction vehicles, industrial HGVs, and eventually commuter traffic. We have had objections from across the whole of Holderness and even the City of Hull. We all know to our cost that Heddon Road is overburdened. It's chaotic already, all the way from the M62 and across Hull, both ways. I fear the impact on the nearby village of Preston with its severely congested crossroads. The increasing number of drivers coming from the north and east will all be funneled through these narrow streets. They will have no alternative. Result, gridlock in the village and the surrounding areas. Of course, proposals to improve the roundabouts along Heddon Road will be welcomed. However, they won't reduce the extra traffic. It will continue to increase year on year, but it will just be quicker. An adequate and efficient method of surface water dispersal is essential to allow for water from the several millions of square feet of concrete. It must give residents a peace of mind that their already finely balanced flood risk will not increase. Hundreds of homes were inundated in 2007, and we don't need to face that again. Very substantial underground storage facilities are required and controlled discharges to allow for the increasing rainfall caused by future climate change. We will need suitably effective screening strips. They will need to be in place before the first buildings are occupied. Residents don't want to see and hear the noise from these massive buildings, either on their commute twice a day or from their homes and gardens. The density of buildings, light, height, noise, pollution and dust, the list goes on. I note that many planning conditions have been proposed. It is to be hoped that they will turn out to be sufficiently robust, effective and enforceable. This is probably the largest scheme in the whole of Europe. In my opinion, therefore, it is vital that the application comes back to this committee for its final decision. It's much too vast and has such potential impacts for it not to. I ask you please to make that a requirement. Sorry about the noises off, the dog's barking at someone. Finally, has this recent public consultation exercise really been up to expectations, or has it purely been constructed to satisfy the needs of this committee? Exactly an hour for each of the communities of Paul and Heddon. This is surely not enough time to ask and get answers to all the residents' questions. Much of the time was taken up by the applicant's own presentation. And what about those people without access to IT? They couldn't participate. Some residents say that they were excluded from the process. Surely the applicant would wait another few weeks until a proper consultation can occur. Is it worth asking the planning officers, who apparently sat in both of the meetings, what is their viewpoint? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Dennis. That concludes the presentations by the objectors. On behalf of all the councillors present today, we thank you very much for that, and they were very informative. Now we're going to speak to the applicants, or the applicant going to speak to us. I'd like to start with a Mr. David Morris from ABP. Mr. Morris, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Mr. Morris. Please start when you're ready.
Can we share a presentation, please? Liz, are you able to share the presentation?
Who's sharing it? Yourself, Mr. Morris, or a colleague?
Hi, please. Elizabeth Osborne.
Liz Osborne is sharing it.
Just one moment, and then we'll just give that facility. There you go, Ms. Osborne. You should be able to share now.
Can you put it into presentation mode, Liz? There it is.
Can you see that?
I can, yeah. Thank you, Chair, members of the Planning Committee. I am David Morris, Regional Head of Property for the Humber at ABP. We thank you for the opportunity to present our scheme for Humber International Enterprise Park. I have been personally involved in the scheme for 4 years, as have all the team here to present to you. With me this afternoon, I have Craig Blatchford, Partner and Head of Planning for Montague Evans, who will take us through the planning issues. Kirsty Cobb, Technical Director for ACOM, will take us through the flood risk and mitigation, drainage, biodiversity and heritage. James Quigley, Associate Director of Sistra, who will talk around the key highways issues and our agreed mitigation. Next slide, please. ABP and its shareholders remain very committed to developing this site and have so far invested over £1 million in this planning process. The site, once developed, will conservatively, we estimate, attract an inward investment of over 350 million, creating 6,500 jobs in addition to apprenticeship and workplace schemes. We are in advanced discussions with 2 international companies who are further attracted to the site by the recent Humber Freeport announcement. Our application will include the upgrading of Poole Road and the construction of a new link road connecting the existing Headon roundabout to a new roundabout to be constructed on Poole Road. Next slide, please. On the 3rd of March this year, the Chancellor of the Exchequer announced that the Humber was to gain free port status. A free port is a port where normal tax and custom rules do not apply. The announcement followed a competitive bidding process, bringing together businesses across the Humber, all 4 local authorities and 2 local enterprise partnerships to create a bid that proposes to be one of the most exciting economic transformations the area has ever seen. The Humber ports handle 17% of the nation's trade. Humber International Park is a key part of the Hull East tax zone, along with Saltend Chemical Park and the Yorkshire Energy Park. Hull East is one of the 3 allocated tax zones in our bid. These zones are specifically there to attract new business and stimulate investment into the area. Benefits include accelerated capital tax allowances, relief from stamp duty and land taxes, relief from business rates, relief from employers' national insurance contributions for the first 3 years of operation. I'd now like to hand you over to Craig Blatchford to take you through the planning issues. Next slide. Thank you.
Thank you. Next slide, please, Liz. Thank you, David. As you'll be aware, members, this application for port-related employment development in accordance with the local plan has been with the council now for more than 2 years. But I thought I'd start by providing some high-level context for you. The background to the site's development is extensive and dates back to the 1960s. For example, land to the south of Poole Road has been allocated for port-related employment development in some shape or form in at least 4 successive local plans. It has been allocated for development going right back to the East Riding Development Town Map of 1960, through the Holderness District-wide Plan in 1999 and the Joint Structure Plan in 2005. And the whole site was included in the current adopted local plan and site allocation in 2016. The adoption of the current local plan followed lengthy public consultation and an independent inquiry by a government-appointed inspector. Further context is established by other layers of planning and legislation, which looks to promote development and deliver economic regeneration. This includes the enterprise zone status, the local development order granted in 2013, and most recently, as David has said, confirmation of the Freeport status. Lastly, and very importantly, I wanted to highlight that the application before you is a hybrid application. Only the proposed road is a detailed element. All other aspects are in outline and subject to key issues set by parameters plans, including building heights, landscape buffers, ecological mitigation areas, and so on. The plans and images you see are illustrative only, and all buildings on the site will be subject to future applications, which will go through their own planning process. Next slide, please. Thank you. As you know, the application was deferred from the 4th of February Planning Committee so that all outstanding statutory consultee responses could be received. And in addition, members wanted further public consultation to be undertaken. As well as updating you on that subsequent consultation, I thought members would welcome a wider picture. As I've previously mentioned, the site has a long and established development plan history for the type of development we propose. This has involved its own public consultation, including most recently extensive council engagement leading up to the adoption of the local plan and the site allocations development. Prior to the submission of this application, ABP held 3 public events in Heddon and Paul Village Halls in autumn 2018. Overall, more than 300 people attended these events. After this, ABP has continued to keep on top of all consultation responses and local resident comments, and through the application process amended the scheme further. Still, as a result of this, I will come back to some changes. Most recently, and as requested specifically by members, we've held 2 further events. Due to COVID restrictions, these were indeed virtual, but were nevertheless fully advertised and well attended. Please, next slide. These were well attended by parties with a specific interest in the project and who represent local residents, whether that be parish councillors or lead representatives of Paddle and the like. Overall, 13 people attended or spoke at the event, and more than 270 have watched the session online. Taking all this into account, overall, we consider that ABP have undertaken significant and material public engagement, and that this itself builds on the foundations already established by the council through the local plan process. Next slide, please. In the next 2 slides, I want to highlight how ABP have responded to comments and how the scheme has evolved, including since it was formally submitted. I'm only going to focus on key changes. First, we have removed 2 buildings. Building 16, which was in the southwest corner towards Paul Village, shown in red outline, and Building 8. The former increases the separation distance between Paul and potential buildings on the site, and the latter preserves the historic alignment of the Burswick Drain. Secondly, we have reconfigured and reduced the proposed development at the Heddon Road roundabout to allow for a park and ride should the need for it arises. And lastly, we've increased the habitat mitigation area by 20 hectares to 56 hectares. The upshot of this is an overall net reduction in floor space of more than 51,000 square meters. Finally, and going back to the theme of public engagement, one particular takeaway from the recent round of public consultation for us was the idea of a forum for ABP and its team to liaise with the community through the further planning and development phases, should planning permission be granted. On behalf of ABP, I can confirm this afternoon that ABP would like to take this idea up. Next slide, please. My final slide seeks to show simply the difference between the consented scheme and the one before you today at a very high level, and place it in the context of the planning policy and other backgrounds such as the LDO. The scheme on the left was the scheme as submitted, on the right is as it's been amended. 4 points to highlight. Only 21.5% of the site will have buildings on it. The LDO itself allowed for up to 30%. The amount of buildings on land south of Poole Road is less than allowed for in the LDO. The ecological mitigation area is half as big again as the required in the local plan allocation. Extensive landscaping, flood mitigation, and the ecological areas are proposed to maintain open space across and on the boundary of the site. Having set the general planning context, I'll now hand to Kirsty Cobb, Technical Director of AECOM, who will address flooding, biodiversity and heritage matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Just to summarise, we've undertaken a comprehensive environmental impact assessment for the proposed development, covering many topics, including water quality, flood risk and drainage, biodiversity, cultural heritage, air quality, noise, landscape and visual impacts. And those assessments also included consideration of cumulative impacts with other proposed developments, such as the Yorkshire Energy Park. That work follows on from similar assessments we did for the local development order and prior to that for the site allocation process. As Craig said, though, the topics I'm focusing on today are flood risk and drainage, biodiversity and heritage. Next slide, please, Liz. So there are three main potential sources of flooding relevant to this area. There's flooding from the estuary, from local watercourses, and from surface water runoff during heavy rainfall. Tidal flood risk is managed by the large existing defences which will not be affected by the development. We know that overtopping watercourses and surface water runoff has caused flooding in this area in recent years, and the lead local flood authority has been keeping us updated on their current investigations into these issues and emerging plans to improve the situation. Ultimately, we'll be required to make sure the site is a safe place to work, make sure flood risk is not increased on or off the site, protect the existing flood defences by allowing offset space between them and the development, allow continued access to watercourses for maintenance, and design the drainage for the site to also prevent pollution. We've consulted with the Environment Agency, the lead local flood authority, and the South Holderness IDB to make sure the development meets their requirements. Next slide, please, Liz. To ensure the development doesn't increase flood risk on or off the site, we will prepare emergency plans and provide safe refuges within buildings to ensure the safety of people working on the site. We'll store all surface water runoff from the site within the site. Storage will be sized to cope with a 1 in 100 year storm event, plus an additional 30% allowance for future increases in rainfall due to climate change, and will only be allowed to discharge that water at the greenfield runoff rate, which means there'll be no change to the existing situation. Storage areas will also be provided within the site for flood water that may be brought to the site via Burswick Drain during major storms, and those will all be secured by planning conditions. Next slide, please. We'll also be allowing easements, protected space along the flood defences to protect them and to allow access for their maintenance. And as well as holding water on site, the drainage system will also prevent pollution. And the detailed designs will be approved by East Riding Council in consultation with the Environment Agency, lead local flood authority and the IDB again. In addition to that, to improve the existing situation, ABP is also committed to providing a permanent power supply to the Environment Agency's pump at the tidal gates on Head and Haven. That pump's been used for several years to alleviate flooding by pumping water over the gates into the estuary when the gates are closed at high tide. And the pump's currently powered by a generator, which can be unreliable. So the Environment Agency has asked us to provide a permanent power supply to it. And that commitment will also be secured by planning conditions. Moving on to biodiversity on the next slide. So we know from many years of survey that the site is used by water birds at high tide, in particular lapwing, curlew and golden plover. And a large bird habitat was created by ABP at Newton Garth in 2014 as a condition of the local development order. That habitat is now well established and attracting the water birds it was designed to support. The mitigation site is shown in blue on the plan, and the wetland scrapes that have been created are visible on this aerial image. The habitat condition and bird numbers are monitored every year by ABP, and management of the site has evolved over the first few years to make year-on-year improvements. For example, cattle was introduced to the site in 2017 to improve the amount of earthworms in the soil which the birds feed on. The Newton Garth habitat site will be significantly extended by a further 20 hectares as part of the proposed development. That's the areas shown in purple on that plan, and management and monitoring of the whole site will continue. We'll also be providing bird flyways in the development site, and they're shown in yellow around the edges, to provide green connections to the estuary and other habitats to the north of the site. The flyway along the southern boundary nearest to Poole is about 75 metres wide. There aren't many developments that are in this position of having an established habitat already in place at this stage, giving certainty that the mitigation will work because it's already there. As well as bird surveys, we've also done habitat surveys and surveys for great crested newt, bats, otter and water vole. And we know there's a great crested newt breeding pond on the site, which will be retained with extensive green habitats around it. Next slide, please. Lastly, just touching on heritage, there's the line of sight between the Grade 1 listed churches in Heddon and Paul will be maintained by the proposed development. And also, since the planning application was submitted, as Craig mentioned, the development has been scaled back to avoid any development on the historic alignment of Heddon Haven, now known as Burswick Drain, along the route of the public footpath. So its alignment will be retained. And ABP will also be providing some interpretation boards along the footpath to tell the important story of the historic port of Heddon, which was once the 11th largest port in England. And the provision of those information boards will also be secured by planning condition. That was my last slide, and I'll hand over to James Quigley to talk about transport.
Thanks, Kirsty. Next slide, please. So, as you'll be aware, this site has been identified within East Riding's local plan. And as part of the local plan submission, the council were required to demonstrate to Highways England, Hull City Council, and ultimately the planning inspector that the traffic associated with the development allocation could be accommodated within the road network. And at that time, the principle and the scale of mitigation schemes required was identified and agreed with the highway authorities. So there's an established history and planning policy that the development is deliverable from a transport perspective. In addition, as our development is allocated within the local plan, there is a requirement for the applicant of the Yorkshire Energy Park to effectively include this development as a committed development, i.e. the delivery of the Yorkshire Energy Park could not stymie the development of the local plan allocated site. Yorkshire Energy Park therefore needed to demonstrate as part of their assessment that their development could be delivered on top of or in addition to this development. And as they were granted planning permission, this demonstrates that they satisfied the highway authorities that both developments could be accommodated within the road network. Next slide, please. So for the assessment of this development, we have prepared a detailed transport assessment that has assessed the impact of the development on the surrounding highway network in terms of capacity and congestion and in highway safety. We've undertaken traffic and pedestrian counts, as well as using those undertaken by the Yorkshire Energy Park. As part of the application, we've undertaken a cumulative assessment of the developments in the area, including the Yorkshire Energy Park. And we've worked closely with the highway authorities since the start of 2018 to agree the findings of the transport assessment with them. Next slide, please, Liz. So if I can turn to the development in a bit more detail. We've undertaken a detailed access appraisal of the development. Vehicular, pedestrian and cycle access to the development will be provided at 2 roundabouts via an upgraded roundabout at the location of the existing A1033 B1362 roundabout, with the site being served via a new southern arm. That's shown at point 1 on the slide. A second new roundabout will be developed on Paul Road, approximately 1.5 kilometres south of the Salt End grade separated roundabout, which is shown at point 2 on the slide. The capacity requirements of both of those roundabouts has been tested and again has been agreed with the highway authorities. A new estate road shown by the red solid line on the slide will be provided, which will connect the 2 site access roundabouts, and that will be the access road to serve the development on either side of the road. It'll be a public road and it'll be accessible by all traffic. Paul Road, shown by the blue line on the slide, will be upgraded as part of the development. A new footway cycleway will be provided on the east side of the road, connecting from the new roundabout at point 2 up to Salt End roundabout and to the existing pedestrian and cycle routes that exist at that point. Paul Road will always remain as a public road and open to all traffic. An improved pedestrian and cycle route will be provided from the 1033 site access roundabout to the east and through Heddon and connecting up to the existing facilities that lead up to Preston. That's shown by the green solid line on the slide. Public rights of way internal to the site, shown by the green dashed line on the slide, will be maintained and be improved, and they'll be linked up to provide a more cohesive footpath network across the site. And pedestrian refuges will be provided at all road crossing points. The development will also include for the provision of bus stops internal to the development and on Paul Road. And the location and layout of these and subsequent routing of buses will be agreed as part of reserve matters applications as the development is rolled out. Next slide, please. So if I can move on to the mitigation strategy. The transport assessment identifies that unchecked traffic generation will impact upon the operation of the road network, so a mitigation strategy is required. Now, our mitigation strategy consists of a package of measures, including agreed trip thresholds, which limit the volume of traffic that the development can put onto the road network during the peak periods, substantial upgrades to 6 junctions along the 1033 corridor, the pedestrian and cycle upgrades mentioned previously adjacent to Paul Road and connecting to Heddon, and the introduction of a green travel plan, which includes a package of measures aimed at promoting greener, cleaner and sustainable travel choices. All of the layouts mentioned have been tested in junction models and have been agreed with the highway authorities and have also been subjected to an independent road safety audit. Although not part of the application, the indicative master plan also safeguards land for a park and ride site and identifies a potential rail freight link. We will be conditioned to review the requirement for the delivery of these with the highway authority as the development comes forward. And if these are developed, it'll provide betterment to the operation of the road network than what is currently being assessed. All of these measures have been agreed with the highway authorities, and again, it's stressed that they are secured by planning conditions. Next slide, please, Liz. So if I can just mention the construction stage in a little more detail. The development will be conditioned to prepare a construction and environmental management plan. A construction environmental management plan is developed to identify the strategy to avoid, minimize and mitigate against construction effects on the environment and on surrounding communities. It's a dynamic and live document with reviews being undertaken throughout the construction process. And it considers all elements of construction and the impact that it has upon noise, vibration, lighting, flood risk and on traffic itself. Next slide, please. The construction and environmental management plan will include measures such as the requirement to undertake risk assessments on all construction related activities, measures to control the location and timing of sensitive works, for example, to avoid impacting on biodiversity features, measures to ensure there is no runoff from construction activities into watercourses, measures to control the volume and timing and routing of construction vehicles so that, for example, they have to use the principal road network, and to ensure that parking associated with construction traffic is not overspilling onto the public highway. And it'll also include the management of roadworks to minimize delay and ensure that access to properties is maintained at all times. It also includes rules for contractors and a compliant management in the event that contractors aren't following the rules. It'll also identify key personnel and the channels through which they will consult and notify public upon phases of construction. And this will dovetail with the community liaison commitment mentioned earlier in the presentation. Again, the preparation of the construction and environmental management plan and its implementation will be secured via the planning condition. Thank you.
Thank you. Does that conclude the ABP presentation?
Yeah, that concludes our presentation. Thank you, Chair.
No, thank you very much indeed, Mr. Morris. Okay, well, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all those people speaking objection to this application and taking the time to put your presentation together. Also ABP for putting their presentation together. So councillors of the committee, you have an opportunity now to, if you have any questions that have been raised by these presentations, to raise those questions now. But I'll remind you, we cannot enter into debate. So if a particular question has come to mind, maybe one of the objectors has raised or one of the applicants raised, now is the time to ask it, and then we can ask officers to bring that back to the planning committee on Thursday. So Councillor Steele.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a few questions here, but I won't hog the system. I'll ask a couple and then I might come back. It's difficult to visualise the whole thing at the moment. I've got a couple of points down here. One is we're looking at transport. what type of transport? We don't know yet because we don't know what the industries are going to be. Are we assuming these are all going to be HGVs, which makes a huge difference, you know, in terms of the traffic situation? The allocation of the site, I think in the local plan it said 30% of it was to be developed in the LDO. What proportion is this going to cover of the site? And I think the applicants did state a figure, but is that based just on the buildings, or is it the buildings and the hard standing? Because that makes a difference to the flooding risk. So do we have those figures? I'll just leave it at that for the moment, Chairman, and I'll try and find the other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Steele. Councillor Davison. Councillor Davison.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Just a simple question. The size of shed 15 was referred to as twice the size of the proposed Melton Business Park Amazon site. Could I have an answer as to how those two compare in footprint size? Thank you.
No, you can. Thank you very much, Councillor Davison. Councillor Matheson.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, and this is very much an extension of the port, and it's confined to port-related industries. What I would like is some clarification on how this site connects with the port, with shipping, because that's the basis of a port. Would it be lorries along Headon Road, feeding between different parts of the port site? Or would it be through rail links, or have I missed something, and are there potential for ships actually to come in through Headon Haven?
Thank you, Councillor Matheson. Are there any other questions from councillors from today's presentation? Councillor Steele, do you wish to come back? Councillor Steele, you're on mute. Councillor Steele, you're on mute.
Terribly sorry, Chairman. We all do it sometimes, don't we?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, just change with the change of use categories. I'd like a bit more clarification on as to what type of industry we will be looking at on the site. And I recognise at this stage it's outlined, but once we've given outline approval, we then may feel that we're being railroaded into approve the applications that then come forward for the site. So having some indication as to what we're talking about, whether it is big, noisy, smelly industry with HGVs coming and going. And like the previous question, you know, is it going to be linked with the docks as I understood it was supposed to be on this site? So I'd like a bit more information on that if possible. And to do with the proportion of the site that's actually covered, whether it's the buildings or the buildings plus the hard standing because of the flood risk. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Steele. Councillor Chadwick.
Thanks, Chairman. Just looking at condition 14, which is about monitoring the whole system. I'd be interested to have an explanation as to how it's got, and I know what it says, but you know, 1,000 vehicles coming and going and different things happening. I'd be interested to know how it's all going to be monitored. If we can have an explanation of that, please.
Yeah, I think that'd be very much a question for our Highways Department. Councillor Scow, you had your hand up. Do you wish to speak?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Chair. It's regarding what Kirsty Cobb said about the South Wales Internal Drainage Board. There's several councillors here today that are on that board. And only a week or two ago, I had a word with the clerk of the board, who said he still had objections, several objections about the application, but she said that everything was fine at the moment with the drainage board. I'd like clarification from the officers whether that's correct or not, and when they last consulted with the drainage board. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scow. We'll get that for Thursday for you. Councillor Whittle.
Thank you, Chairman. Just briefly, I would be interested to know what sort of timescale we'll be talking about for the approval of the actual buildings themselves, and indeed whether by agreeing the hybrid application we are actually digging ourselves into a corner as to how those buildings will be approved or not approved. Thank you, Chair.
No, I think that's a very valid question, Councillor. I'm sure we'll get that answer on Thursday. No further questions from councillors at this stage. Okay, well, And what I'm going to do now is actually going to close this meeting down. The whole purpose of this was to give a bigger platform for the people speaking objections to this and also the applicants, because obviously in committee we are limited on time. I think I can personally say from my own point of view, it's been really enlightening. I think a lot of issues have been raised from the objectors that we will seek answers to at committee. I'm sure that's going to be very interesting. And also the applicant has brought through some changes which I thought was entertaining. So on that, I'm actually going to close this meeting now and thank everybody for coming, and we'll see you on